Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify Nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at Basic ASA Firewall Configuration. We'll be discussing Basic ASA Settings, ASA Default Configurations, and ASA Interactive Setup Initialization Wizard. This episode is part of my series on network security for the CCNA. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. The ASA command line interface is a proprietary operating system, but it has that similar look and feel to the router iOS. For example here, the ASA command line contains command prompts similar to that of the Cisco iOS router. We can do the abbreviation of commands. Once that command is unique, you don't have to type any more of that in there. So that is the abbreviation of commands. Then we have tab key completion, just like we have in the router, switch, iOS, just like in Linux. Once you type enough characters that it becomes unique, you can go ahead and hit tab. And we also have the help key or the question mark. You can put that after the command to view additional syntax. Here's a table comparing common iOS router and ASA commands. Over here, we have our iOS router command. Now, to enable our secret password, it's enable secret password, which happens to be the same on the ASA command. To set up access to our virtual terminal emulators, you have to go on the router, you have to go in the line VTY0, set up your password, and then activate the login process. On the ASA, all you have to do is type PASSWD. That's the Linux version of password, and then what your password is, that sets up your virtual terminal passwords. On the iOS router, IP route allows you to go ahead and create your static routes. On the ASA, you do the route and then IF_name. What IF stands for is this is the interface. So whatever interface you're working on. In the router, show IP interface brief is the same command as the ASA. You can get all your details on your interface. To see your routes on the router, you do a show IP route. On the ASA, it's just show route, no IP in there. On the router, to do show IP NAT translations, to see your NAT translations. On the ASA, it's just show XLATE or translate. Once again, instead of spelling out translate, they do XLATE. To save your configurations on the router, we do a copy running -config startup config. On the ASA, they use the method they're deprecating on the routers, which is the write memory. So WRITE and then memory, that is optional, but that saves your configuration. Once again, on the router, they're trying to phase that out. And then finally, last thing down here is to erase the startup so you have a clean device to start with. In the ASA, we use the write command again, WRITE. Write erase is how you delete that saved config file. On the ASA, something to note that is different than that router iOS is ASA CLI commands can be executed regardless of the current configuration mode. What that means is you don't have to be in user exec mode, privilege exec mode, global configuration mode. The command line commands you enter in, they'll be executed regardless of what configuration mode you are in. Some of us are used to using the do command in the Cisco iOS for routers and switches. The ASA does not even recognize that as a valid command. The ASA 5506X with Firepower services ships with a default configuration that in most instances is sufficient for your basic small office, home office deployment. Use the command here, configure factory-default. So the command configure space factory-default in global configuration mode to restore the factory default configuration. The default host name is Cisco ASA. So this is the default host name. By default, the privilege exec and console line passwords are not configured. These settings can be changed by either manually using the CLI, so we can go ahead and use the CLI, interactively using a CLI wizard, initial setup wizard, or a third one using ASDM setup wizard. So 3 different ways to go ahead and set up your different passwords for privilege exec mode and your consoles. The wizard is displayed when there's no startup configuration, and then it prompts you pre-configure firewall now through interactive prompts, yes or no. Once again, in the square brackets here, that's the default answer. If you want that, you can just go ahead and press enter. To cancel the wizard and display the ASA default user exec mode, just go ahead and enter no there and you press enter. Otherwise, if you want to go into this interactive wizard, you can either, once again, type yes or simply hit enter to accept the default yes. This initiates the wizard, and the ASA interactively guides an administrator to configure the default settings. This wizard is actually helpful. In contrast to the wizard, would you like to enter initial configuration dialog on routers and switches, where most people just never use that because it sets it up in weird ways? This wizard, this startup, this pre-configure firewall through an interactive wizard, this is actually very helpful. As you can see, as you look at this wizard, we want to know what mode we're in. So you can set the mode. Then you set your password. Then we set a recovery password. Then we go through and set the clock. We set our management IPs, management masks. We can set a host name, set up a domain name, and then the IP address of the host running the device manager. Enter in all that information. Go ahead. It prompts you, is this okay? Yes, it is. We can go ahead and save it. As you'll notice here, this is all very useful information, sort of like your basic setup. So I recommend using this ASA interactive wizard. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on basic ASA firewall configuration. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com. There you can find out how to get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on network security for the CCNA. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of my series on network security for the CCNA. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.